Increasing numbers of people are waking up to the need to live more harmoniously with the earth, with one another, and with all life on the planet. We cannot continue as we have been, and other ways of living are possible. I am your host, Epiphany Paris, and I am one of the many holding space for this transformation. In this time, we can reconnect and share our gifts with one another. This show features conversations with rainbow warriors, healers, activists, artists, writers, farmers, and many other people who are living the questions and living the change in their personal lives. This show will focus on practical solutions, radical strategies, paradigm-shifting ideas, inspiring people, and spiritual transformations. This is the space between. In this space between the destructive times we have been living and the holistic way of life that is possible, we are here. What will we do with the time we have? And welcome to the show, everybody. Before we cut into the interview, we are going to do just a couple announcements. If anybody is listening to the show and you want to make a comment or a question that will be read on the air, you can go to Twitter and write the question in Twitter and then mention Space Between. Or there's a Facebook page, The Space Between. You can also write live questions there. Also, a big announcement I want to make quick is that I am looking for this show to become even more of a hub for amazing people and your ideas. So I'm looking it's going to become more of a blog and not just a radio show. The radio show is going to continue to be every week as it has been, but there's also going to be more elements of the blog. So I'm looking for one-time guest bloggers. I'm looking for music, poetry, or if you have a website you'd like to share, but you don't necessarily want to write a guest blog to talk about what you're doing, just let me know. Any of those things, or if you even have any other ideas, please let me know, because I'd love to, bring your talents to the light a little bit more. I love bringing people's amazingness to the public as much as I can. So today we're talking with Teri Parsley Starnes. She is a consulting astrologer, teacher, and priestess. She consults internationally via phone or Skype and locally in her Minneapolis office. She has been a teacher and priestess in several earth-based pagan communities, including the Reclaiming Tradition, the Tree and the Well, and Diana's Grove Mystery School. She has a weekly astrology column called Follow the Moon, which is also on Facebook. And I have her on the line right now. Hi, Teri.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a relaxing Labor Day weekend, so I'm enjoying spending some time with you.
Yay. Well, thank you for sharing that time with me.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about a number of things today, including the time that we're in, and also how to use information about astrology in people's daily lives. But I guess to start with, just in case anyone isn't familiar with astrology, could you just give a sort of very, very basic, bare bones outline of how it works?
Oh, very basic outline of how astrology works. Astrology is a very mysterious tool, technique, or an art that I don't know how it works. I just know that it does. And I really am trusting on future scientists to discover how it works, because that would just be a wonderful synthesis between our physical realms and our mysterious realms. Because
I think it'll happen.
Astrology really does touch on our spirits and our souls and mystery and myth. But I think, there are lots of different styles and traditions in astrology. And the one that I use is called Western or tropical astrology. And that is based on the seasons rather than saying this planet is actually in front of this particular constellation. That's another system of astrology called sidereal, and in India they use that system, and it's also called Vedic. So there's lots of systems of astrology, and the one that I'm really proficient in is called tropical and Western astrology. And then I also have a focus. There are lots of different kinds of focuses to have in astrology, and my focus really is on the personal. So the psychological self, the spiritual self, the mythic self. So I'm looking at those things when I use astrology.
Awesome.
Uh-huh.
So
what I know that we had a little pre-interview or a little idea of what else I could do to describe what astrology is, and you talked about just naming what the pieces of astrology are that I use. Is that what you'd like me to do now?
Yeah, basically, planets are this, houses are this.
Yeah. So what we're doing in the astrology that I use is often consulting a chart that's cast for a moment in time, and that chart can describe a person. So it's called a natal chart, and we're looking at where the planets are, what signs they're in, and what houses they're in. So those are the primary building blocks of astrology. It's planets, signs, and houses. The houses actually are formed by the moment in time, and we divide up the whole 360 degrees of the sky into 12 pieces, and there are 12 signs, and there are 12 houses. The signs are the constellations, and they are really the way that a planet, and we call the sun and moon planets, and we call things like Chiron, which is not a sun which is not really a planet. It acts more like a comet. We astrologers tend to call it all planets. So please know that I know that the sun and moon are not planets, but we call them that just to make it more simple. So all those points in space, those planets that we look at occupy signs, and then they also occupy houses. So the planets, say, we're going to talk about Mars. It has its own thing that it's about, its own energy. I kind of think of them as gods. And so the Mars god is about our will and our passion, our desire, our drive. And it's in a sign. And that's going to color the way we have access to our will and passion, and how we also use our will and passion. So it's some people kind of use a metaphor of, we take the planet and we put the clothes on them, and the clothes are the sign. And then the house is that area of life where that sign is real, where that planet, is really active and is influencing that area. So all the houses in a chart are areas of life. So we'll look at, say, if you wanted to know a little bit about your energy level, I would look at Mars, and I would say, well, this Mars is in this sign, and that's going to influence how you use your energy. And then the house would tell us where you often find Mars activity stimulated. So Mars gets a little bit more active in that area of life. Does that kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at when we look at a chart?
Yeah, that's an absolutely perfect overview.
Mm-hmm.
I know I was asking a lot of you to sum it up really quickly, but
well, I can go into more depth, but it is a big topic.
Right, and we have a lot that we can talk about, and because if someone hasn't done a lot of astrology, you can get the idea from weekly horoscopes that your sun sign is all that matters.
Right.
But when you're looking at a natal chart, you are looking at where Mars is in relationship to the sun, and what sign it's in, what house it's in, and everything else. So,
yes.
So yeah, there's a lot of factors that make up a person.
Exactly, and I think that's why. There's a lot of detractors from astrology, and I do believe that they're not aware that most astrologers use a lot more information than simply a sun sign. And, it doesn't make sense that everyone who was born within 1 month would act the same way. So, the sun is really important. It describes what we're striving for, and it describes our sense of self and who we are, but it's not all of us. So, I kind of think of it, it's a committee, all of the planets are have a voice and a say. And so it becomes really complex. And that's kind of what I like about astrology. One of my teachers, astrology teacher Cynthia Jones, would sympathize with astrology students because it's so complex, and a lot of people get overwhelmed when they think about that complexity. But she also pointed out that if astrology is really describing who we are, then we don't want it to be simple. We want it to be as complex as we are, and it is. It's a very complex system of looking at our energies and our potentials and what makes us tick. I do a lot of writing. I do a weekly forecast about the time that we're in, and I use, my philosophy about astrology is to use it for what I call a mindfulness practice, which is just being aware. Not necessarily trying to anticipate the disasters or the problems that, I could have or anyone could have, or to stave them off, or to, try to make our way through life without having any problems. But to just be aware, to notice, to look at the reoccurring cycles and patterns and what it's telling me. And I have a real strong goal to use this awareness to grow, to become a more compassionate person, a more mindful person, a wiser person. So that's what I'm looking at when I talk about the energies of now. And I one of the things that I do follow quite a bit is, where's the moon? What is the moon doing? I think the moon moves through the whole entire zodiac in the course of one lunar cycle, which is about 28, 29 days. And it's so it's staying in a sign about two to 2.5 days. So it's really influencing and coloring the energy of every day. And it tends to describe our moods and just kind of the energy that we're approaching life with. Today, the moon is in Aries, and it's conjunct Uranus in Aries, and then it's also squaring Pluto in Capricorn. And this Pluto square Capricorn aspect is something that I have really been paying attention to, and a lot of astrologers actually have been paying attention to. And it's coloring not only today's energy, but it's coloring our energy for the next, until 2015. So we've got a long time that we get to kind of observe and deal with what is Pluto square Uranus about. And so today the moon is kind of touching on that energy, so we may feel it a little stronger. I call it a trigger. And about once a week since the summer began, the moon has triggered this energy. And I think it's kind of added a little bit of a sense of anxiety and tension, because Pluto square Uranus is a little bit of a anxiety producing transit. So what are those planets about? What's Pluto about? What's Uranus about? Pluto is about deep transformation, and Uranus is about revolution and change, too. They both want change. Pluto wants to change things through sort of digging deep and uncovering what we might kind of think of as secrets or toxic or things that are hard to look at. And Uranus just wants freedom and authenticity and innovation, wants to create something new. So when those two planets come together in a hard aspect like a square, like they are right now, there's this roiling kind of energy of, wow, things really do need to heal. They need to transform. And we get impatient with things not moving quickly enough. And sometimes there's rash action, and sometimes there's, necessary change that happens. In the world, we've seen the Occupy movement is definitely a part of this energy, and we've seen all of the revolution in the Mideast, the Egyptian revolutions, and what we call, I think, the the Mideast spring. Is that what
the Arab
called?
Spring?
Arab Spring.
Yeah,
That's what it's called. Definitely kind of part of this. Uranus square Pluto. And what these two planets are doing now is a phase of their overall cycle which lasts over 100 years. And they came together to begin this cycle in the 1960s. So we sort of have an initial seed planted in the 60s for the kinds of changes we're going to be experiencing over the next 3 years. So in let's see, the first time these planets actually are kind of dancing in a square with each other for 7 exact times over the next 3 years. The first time they came together exactly was June 24th, and they're coming up to another really strong time in September 19th. And then the third time won't be until 2013, so we get a little bit of a breathing space. But right now, building up to an election in the U.S. and just seeing all over the world conflict kind of bubbling up, we're embroiled in this, and we're dealing with it as well as we can. The moon today, like I said, is touching that off. So I would just have people notice how they're feeling today about tension, how they're feeling about open conflict in their lives, or how they may be feeling about closed and secret conflict. All of these things are sort of part of today. And we're, overall, I think we're being massaged by the moon, touching on this aspect once a week to really kind of decide what our own values around conflict and change are, and what our own values around sort of integrity and how we go about changing things that need change. There's one thing to say this needs to be changed, and we can just sort of rock the boat and make everything fall apart, or we can put as much consciousness into change as we can. And that's sort of what I've been looking at. That's just one of the, I think, really significant parts of today. Since this, the beginning of summer, when this aspect became exact, it's been pretty intense. It's been an intense kind of summer. Yeah,
it sure has. Mm-hmm. And the intensity has been building for a while before that, too. Mm-hmm. And as far as the moon goes, this last, what was it, just Friday or Saturday, we had the Pisces full moon.
Yes.
And so that had those deep, deep undercurrents of emotion, or just general deepness.
Yes. Well, all of the signs have an element, and I always think the element is really the first thing. For all of you people learning astrology, pay attention to what the element of the signs are and how you're noticing that energy. Because Pisces, it was a Pisces moon. It was a full moon in Pisces, which is water. And there is a very oceanic kind of expansive energy that happens in Pisces. And we get really in touch with not only our own deep, deep feelings, but the feelings of others. And so we can feel a little bit exposed and a little bit vulnerable when we touch on that bigness of emotion. Like I said, today the moon has shifted into the next sign, which is Aries, which is much more of an action oriented. It's fire. And so that kind of feeds into the volatility of maybe this day and maybe tomorrow when the moon stays in Aries, that we'll just, notice reactions, notice how we want to act quickly, and that is just feeding into the energy.
Is there anything else that's going on right now that you feel like is worth talking about? The Pluto-Uranus thing is huge, and I know that you really wanted to discuss that. Because that is huge. That's the thing that all the astrologers are talking about, I understand.
It is. Well, this summer, another kind of fun thing happened, which I think has really influenced what's going on still, is that Venus transited the sun. And were you aware of that and what the specialness of that? So what that meant was that we could actually view Venus going in front of the sun. And, sometimes Venus will be near the sun. We call it a conjunction, but it won't be in the same plane as the Earth, so we can't see it traveling in front of the sun. But this summer, we were able to do that. And Venus rules has something to do with women, and also has to do with love and beauty and graciousness. And so I think all those qualities have been highlighted this year as well. And we're really, it's just a little bit shocking the way in the news women have been treated. And, another thing is being exposed about what we think, not only about women, but what we think about love, the power of beauty, justice is another thing that Venus rules. So this has been kind of a very fascinating summer, seeing women's issues come up and seeing it's almost like we're seeing what people really think. That sun sort of illuminated that, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Would you say that in general, in a bigger time frame than this summer, do you feel like things are really happening in an astrological sense about things being exposed? I mean, besides just the Uranus and Pluto relationship, mm-hmm. Is there more happening astrologically in this few years right now that's kind of adding to all that?
Well, when I think about year-long cycles, when I think about big shifts, astrologers tend to look at the outer planets, the ones that move slowly, like Pluto and Uranus, and Neptune is another one of those outer planets that moves slowly. And this is Neptune's actions have been a part of everything. And Neptune has moved into Pisces in April of 2011, I think it was. And the last time it was in Pisces, I believe, was in the 1800s. So it's been a very long time coming back to this place. So that tells astrologers that this is part of a new energy, a new area of consciousness and growth for us. And this piece, the Pisces piece, like I said, we get in touch with larger feelings and, mm-hmm. and we lose a sense of our own isolation and our own individuality. So I wouldn't say necessarily it's exposing things so much. I mean, I think Pluto can take care of that energy quite well. But there is, I think, will be continuing to develop over the next 14 years, how long Neptune will be in this sign, to kind of lose a sense of we have to solve our problems individually, or that sense of isolation, like we're alone in whatever struggles that we are facing. And we're going to reach, more and more and more to collective action and collective identity. So that should be a pretty interesting new focus for us, because we are, especially in this country, very individualistic. We've had a long time of feeling like we're isolated, like we're heroic, that we have to just meet our challenges by ourselves. And there's less of that energy now. And I think especially younger people really get that. And I'm kind of excited about that, actually.
Well, it's what's needed, in my opinion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because the idea of individuality is, it's nice, but it's a bit of a myth, because there's this idea in our country right now, at least still to some extent, that if you're, financially solvent and all that you're independent, but you're not really. You're still interdependent on a bigger system. Even if you can't see everybody that you're dependent on, you're still part of a system of people.
Exactly. And if we, one of, I think, Neptune's kind of jobs is to kind of lift a veil. And we might be lifting a veil to seeing those connections of how we can't be deluded any longer, to know that one action or one system over here isn't impacting another and impacting the whole, actually. There's a great idea with Neptune and Pisces that it's about the whole and moving into bigger kind of containers. So, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at the the turning of the ages too, right?
Well, one of the things that I have been thinking about this Neptune and Aquarius time frame is in the context of Joanna Macy's work, which she calls the time that we have to enter into if we're going to survive is the Great Turning. And and this also is turning away from how we are, how humans have kind of thought of ourselves as separate from nature, and so therefore we can abuse it and use it and not take any responsibility for our relationship to nature because we are, not of nature. And this Pisces Neptune energy, I think, is definitely telling us there is no separation. There's no action that we can make that is separate from nature. We are nature. And Joanna Macy is a eco-Buddhist. She calls herself that. So she really takes a Buddhist philosophy and combines it with the ecological philosophy and says that we, really need to reclaim this relationship with nature and with all things. And, we're obviously reaching sort of the end of so many old systems that aren't working for us, systems of economy and uses of resources and even relationships with each other. So we have to turn into a new age. So I hope we do.
Well, and didn't the age of Pisces just end somewhat recently and now we're in Aquarius?
That's another astrological model. Those ages, which are related to an astronomical thing called the precession of the equinoxes, which is a little bit complex, and I'm not going to try to explain them. But it's kind of why tropical astrology and sidereal astrology aren't the same. So when tropical, like me, when we say the sun is in Aries, it's actually in Pisces. And what that is, it's a really long cycle. It's 26,000 years for the precession of the equinoxes to go all the way around the zodiac. So, you divide that by 12, and I think each sign, each precessional age is 2,000 years, roughly, 2,200 years.
Yeah.
So astrologists don't have a definite, so we know about this, and we know that we've been in the age of Pisces, but we don't have a definite marcation of when it ends and when the age of Aquarius begins. So the signs in this order of the precession of the equinoxes go backwards from normal order of the zodiac. So usually we go from Pisces to Aries in real time, but we're going from Pisces to Aquarius. So that's what people mean by the age of Aquarius, and we're on the cusp of it, but I don't think we've actually entered it yet. So we're really finishing up the age of Pisces. And there's been some brilliant analysis about the different ages and how that age has really impacted human culture and philosophy and religion especially. And it's interesting to think about the age of Pisces being a time when Christianity, which has a symbol of fish, and Jesus and the fish is an important symbol, that this may be an ending of Christianity's ascendancy. We may be going into a different kind of spiritual focus. And I realize that Christianity is only one of the religions of the world, but it's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we are on the cusp of an age, and it may be a couple of hundred years actually before that happens for sure. So we're not there yet.
Okay, but we're kind of towards the end.
Well, we're in that liminal space, which is kind of, I've been thinking about, we may want to even segue into the space between, which is the name of your radio show. And I'd love to talk to you about that, the name, because the space between, the liminal space where we're not in Pisces and we're not yet in Aquarius and we're just sort of in between, that is a very powerful place to be. So
yeah. And I love liminal spaces, period.
Yeah.
And they can be defined so many different ways, but I love it. Mm-hmm. That space between dreaming and awake, and the space between different, states of mind, and the space between different ideas, and.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it's an interesting meeting place where there's all kinds of potential.
Right. In my pagan practice, we when we create a circle, when we step into our rituals, we often say that we are between the worlds, and that is a place to really access our own powers and our own awareness, really, so that is a really powerful place to be, is this space between. I'm wondering why you chose that name.
Well, I originally chose it because I was reading a book that a friend of mine had given me. It's actually a Christian book, and I don't really consider myself Christian. I consider myself pagan with eclectic leanings, but there's a certain amount of Christianity that I totally identify with. I think Jesus is awesome, and I think his teachings are awesome. And anyway, so I was reading this book because my friend gave it to me, so I try to, when people give me books, I try to read them. And there's a lot of really beautiful spiritual experiences that this lady, the author, has that she writes about. And she was talking about like space between things and different states. And I was kind of like musing. I was like, well, I'm kind of in a space between because this isn't my religion, but at the same time, I'm experiencing these things with her, and they are things that I feel. And so it just sort of like clicked for me. I was like, oh, the space between, like the space between Christianity and paganism, like there is some meeting ground in there. And but then it ended up expanding for me into a bigger idea than that, into an idea about a space between different times, a space between different people, ideas. And of course, just liminal space in general, that sort of sacred space in between.
Right. Well, I find the symbolism in the chart for when you began your radio show to have a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
Did you
I noticed that
about
too.
That?
that was my main question for you about the chart, because I asked you to print out this chart, and you did. And then I was looking at it, and I noticed that there's intercepted houses. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of heard of them before, so I Googled them, and I did a lot of reading. And like 4 of my planets are in intercepted houses that aren't, or intercepted, I might be saying it wrong, but intercepted signs. But they're like in the space between, like they're in liminal space, sort of.
Well, yes. So I don't know if people who are listening to this are interested, but just in case they would like to look at this chart, later, or just kind of wonder what we're talking about. We're looking at the chart when you started this radio program, and that was for the day August 5th, 2012, at 5 p.m. In Washington, District of Columbia. So that's right? That's the... Yeah, okay. So, people can create their own charts or look at it and see what we're looking at. Okay, that, the intercepted houses, that means that a sign is wholly contained within a house. It doesn't appear on the cusp or the edge of the house. So it's not in the beginning of a house. And so those houses become really, really large. And yes, if there are any planets in those intercepted signs, they are kind of swallowed up by those houses in a little bit. I think of it, planets in interception are like gifts that we unwrap slowly, that they were just waiting to spring out and be useful. So there is a little bit of work that needs to happen to access the energy of those planets a little bit. One of the things, but for me, what's more important is in thinking about the space between, is this mysterious sort of not this, not that kind of thing, is that the sun for this radio show is in the 8th house. And the sun is in Leo, which I would think the sun in this chart would represent the energy of your enterprise, its identity, what it's striving for. So I think in Leo, this enterprise, you're striving for creativity, you're striving to make sort of an impression, to spark something. It's a fire sign. So maybe you really want to spark change or new ideas. And it's in the 8th house, which is a more hidden kind of house. It's a house that doesn't immediately show itself because it deals with things like death and sex and power. So it's actually dealing with much more soulful and much more interior work, soulful work. So it's a combination of creative fire and things that are a little bit behind the scenes. So I would say that there's some paradox there for you, it just with your identity, and you may.
I love paradox.
Yes, and you may run into frustration, because sometimes paradox is frustrating. You want to just get your message out there and be seen and make everything very accessible. And then there's just a little bit of, but the people who are going to come might be more poised, might not be just, curious. They might be more poised to do deeper work, and they might have a harder time, but once they do find you, they may really think that it's more important. So to realize, that that sun is a little bit hidden in there, and what it's doing is some deep soulful work. So, another thing, and I do want to say who is your ally for getting your message out there, and that would be Saturn and Mars. And I'll get back to those a little bit. But what I'm really curious about with this space between is thinking about Gemini, because the Gemini energy in this chart is really strong too. In this chart, Venus is sitting right there on what we call the descendant, and that is the line that's, I would say, is looking at the people you're interviewing. Really, who are you bringing in and conversing with? And when you were making that announcement about blogging, I thought, oh, this is the Venus too, because Gemini really is a communicator and a writer and a thinker. But the glyph for Gemini is those two poles. And I often think that duality, the space in between duality, that space between is really sort of the magical quality of Gemini. Gemini sometimes can, shift back and forth in from polarity to polarity, but there's also that ability to go in between polarity and to really craft things, craft conception, craft ideas, craft the message. So you are talking to people, Venus, charmingly, graciously, people who are concerned with beauty and concerned with perhaps justice as well. And they are holding a piece of this space between. So just to even kind of imagine that Venus as a muse for you of who your ideal radio interview person would be, or what kind of mission you'd like to give people in directing them to write or to contribute to this. It's like, how can they bring beauty? How can they bring that opening between polarity and a new idea, which is Gemini is just so good at. And I think so when we look at a chart, like a business type chart, we often look at the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant as describing you. So the ascendant is Sagittarius, and that is an energy of questing for truth and looking for the big picture and making small ideas come together in a whole picture. So that's definitely a quest for you. You are the one who's questing for the overall goal of what each individual who comes into this business will contribute. You're going to put it all together into a synthesis. The ruler is Jupiter, and so that Jupiter is in Gemini again. We get back to that quality of the space between, and we get back to how do we move between polarity, that mystical place. And, it's in the sixth house. So I would also say that there is some daily practice, some daily work that you are going to be called on to do to manifest this vision. That it's not about, sometimes we have ideas about luck and fortune, and then sometimes we have ideas around what we apply our work and our step-by-step labor to also yields satisfying results. And I think that there's something about that's being pointed out in your chart too. And
well,
so
that makes sense. I mean, doing a weekly 1 to 2 hour radio show is a daily job.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely like
Exactly.
there's a lot of daily tasks that I have to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it on the outside, but it definitely makes sense.
Yeah. And Saturn, Saturn and Mars are up there on the midheaven of your business, of this space between radio show. And so Saturn also says stick with it. Keep after, you have the vision, and you need to apply yourself in a real steady and focused way. Saturn is the ally of building something really foundational, something that will last. But you need to kind of apply yourself and just keep at it, because it doesn't come easy, And what it's sort of also pointing to is another air sign, which is Libra. And all the air signs to me have a quality of the polarity, the duality of mind, and then how do we also step out of duality and into wholeness. So the Libra scales are the two scales that we're holding, and we're weighing, and we're judging, and we're trying to create balance. And sometimes, that polarity of those two containers keeps us sort of locked in one place. And when I think about the space between, I think, how do you, make room for the third way, the other way, the way that doesn't say good, bad, or black, white, but that middle ground, but also in balance, also being careful to not go too far in any one direction, returning back to the center and integrating. So that Saturn is an ally, although it does point to, in order to get your sun more recognized, because it's sort of hidden there in that 8th house, you need to apply your Saturn and your Mars, which are right next to each other, to keep the focus going, to apply your will. And, success may not come quickly, but it will come bit by bit. And when it comes, it will be more sustainable. That's kind of what we get to expect from Saturn. So that seems like a good thing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That all makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for our listeners, it's kind of interesting to listen to you explain the chart. I got a reading from Teri. When do we do it? Wednesday?
Yes.
Yeah. So you read my personal chart on Wednesday. And one of the things that you said was that looking at a chart, like a natal chart, is sort of like divination.
Yes.
In the sense that you can look at it at different times and it's going to say different things to you. So it's not like a static thing. And that's even the same astrologer. Different astrologers would also see different things, but the same astrologer can look at the same chart at different times and see different things. So those are you're seeing the things that are coming up right now, but there's also like so much more going on that necessarily isn't quite jumping out as much at this moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's one of the other fascinating things about astrology. There's a quote I read, and I can't remember who wrote this, but he said that a fully interpreted chart is a dead chart. So we just keep looking at it and we keep learning. It's just amazing how much keeps getting revealed. And I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah. Well, and when we talked, I felt like I learned a lot more about astrology in general, but I learned a lot more about myself. Mm-hmm. And I've studied astrology as a little bit just on the side here and there. I've definitely, to even say I was a dabbler might be an exaggeration. But to have somebody really go over your chart like this is really interesting, because you can connect the dots. Like, you can get free reports online, but they don't connect the dots very well, because it's just software that does it, so right. To have a person sit and look and intuitively, just read everything and say, okay, here's the connections, this builds to this does this. It's really like fun and interesting.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your personal consulting work?
Okay. I've been consulting since 1995, and I I do work with people. We can talk via Skype or over the phone or in person. And I really love to support other people's intentions when they come to me. So I like it when people have an intention or give me some kind of idea of, well, why are they drawn to this? What's really working in their souls right now? And we also look at myth. So I'll take what's in a chart and kind of use those myths and those stories to perhaps illuminate what's going on in people's lives. And then, the part that I like to do with astrology is kind of a little bit as related to the mindfulness practice, but it's magic. And that's where we set an intention and then we use maybe the forecasts, the transits that are coming up, or the times in our lives to create an intention that we want to manifest. And so there's a little bit of work with that. So I really think I approach astrology as we have choice and we can bring as much of our own desire to change our lives or to manifest something to it as we want. We aren't fated, or we're not just saddled with a chart that doesn't unfold something beneficial to us. So
would you say we're co-creators? Would you put it that
way? Definitely co-creators. Definitely. Mm-hmm.
So when you were talking about the natal chart for the space between, I liked how you talked about the intercepted houses as gifts that have to be unwrapped slowly.
Yes.
Everywhere that I looked online, everybody talked about it as challenges. Mm-hmm. It's a hard thing, it's a difficult thing, and there's a lot of focus on that. But I like that you said gifts. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that that's your approach in general with things that other people would just say, oh, it's hard. Like you try to open it up so that people have room to explore it.
Well, I base that on my own chart and my own experience of I have an intercepted Venus in my own chart. And it really took me a long time before I realized what a gift my Venus was and how it works for me and what it cares about and what I care about through Venus. So, I do apply a lot of what I think about astrology through my own experiences. So it doesn't mean that I don't have a Venus or that Venus isn't working. It took me a while, though, to understand Venus. So it may take you a while to understand, just coming from the business, to get that sun out there, to know what your message is. You'll be developing it for a while. That's your Mercury there. And I love that you intentionally began your radio show when Mercury was retrograde, kind of dispelling that myth that retrograde Mercury is a terrible time to begin anything. It's really a very magical time. It adds to that idea of the space between, because I do believe that when Mercury's retrograde, we're going in between, that direct motion and that, the retrograde motion, we're kind of going in between the polarity of our brains, the left brain and the right brain, and we're entering into mystical, magical potential. So, that's another indication that, the name is really showing up. The other intercepted planets you have are Neptune and Chiron. And so the healing mission that you have, great compassion, I think that's also going to develop your understanding of what the healing purposes of this radio show are. You're just kind of, it's waiting there, but it's not fully formed. That's how I see it.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I do have to say, as far as your weekly blog goes, I think it's really helpful to follow something like that. Like I look forward to it, to reading your Follow the Moon posts.
Thank you.
And it allows me, I think it's part of that whole pagan idea of living in cycles.
Yes.
Everything has cycles and everything comes around. And if you can kind of flow with the cycle instead of trying to force things forward in a linear sort of way, then there's a lot more opportunity for things to go well.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
There's times of growing, there's times of beginning, there's times of ending, and it's really helpful. Astrology is very helpful to know what those times are, what cycles we're in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel pretty happy with what we covered so far, actually.
Great.
We've kind of covered all the bases that I wanted to talk about. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about besides those?
No, I invite people to get a hold of me. My business is Stars Dance Astrology, and I have a Facebook page. If you want to like that, then you can get more updates from me, or go to my blog, which you can find through either Facebook or the internet, through Stars Dance Astrology. And I really look forward to practicing this craft. It's just a gift for me to be able to do it. I feel very fortunate.
Well, I feel really blessed that you have shared your work on the show today, and that you're, here in the world offering your gift to people.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks. Well, good luck with this radio show.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes.
It's really a labor of love. I just feel like there's so many awesome people out there, and yes. I really want to get that out.
Yes. Well, the Venus on the Descendant, that really points to me that it is love, that you're really connecting with the audience, you're connecting with the people that you want to interview and kind of share the energy of love. This seems really strong.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think we might just say goodnight then, because we kind of covered so many things. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right. It was nice talking to you.
Take care.